A Deal Gone Wrong by Saul Sandoval. Narrated by Martin. Published by Wicked Ink Publishing. Chapter 1. After all these years, Detective Carlos Alvarado would still sometimes get a phantom smell of his sister's rose oil perfume in the brisk wind of the warm summer's night. Parked on Rangerville Road on the west side of Valley City, Carlos sat quietly in his unmarked Ford Explorer writing in his notebook. It was after midnight, and pedestrian traffic was light to non-existent. As he wrote, he kept one eye on the corner apartment. Even though no cars had passed in the last several hours, Carlos maintained his vigilance. He had gotten wind from Reggie, one of his confidential informants, that Roger Martinez, a local speed dealer, would be around sometime tonight. From his glove box, Carlos pulled a container of caffeine pills and popped a couple. He wanted to be sharp if Roger showed up. He fumbled around searching for his cigarettes, but remembered he smoked his last one that morning. Lucky for him, he always left an emergency cigarette under his visor. He grabbed the cigarette from under the visor elastic band, where the picture of his younger sister, Amanda, glided onto his lap. She would have been 24 this year, if it hadn't been for the Fair Park slasher. Immediately following her death, the police did their best but could not find the killer. In fact, the killer went silent. The police couldn't draw a link between both events, but Carlos always felt something was off. Carlos glanced toward the apartment buildings, all of them the same. Each was 5 stories tall, with rows of windows and an old-school fire escape on its side. The sand-colored brick looked pale next to the waving palm trees that lined the street. There was only one street lamp per 2 buildings and many dark spots on the street, which Roger surely took advantage of. Without warning, a light in the second-floor row came on. Carlos grabbed his Glock 22 from under the seat and latched on his bulletproof vest before exiting. He crept along the sidewalk in the shadows, his gun in hand pointed down. As Carlos approached Roger's building, a dark figure passed the second-story middle window. Carlos made his way up the fire escape stairs leading to the window. Tiptoeing up the steps, he threw the safety off his gun and crouched a few steps below the window. Through a crack in the mini blinds, he caught a glimpse of Roger. He was sitting down at a makeshift poker table. Since Roger had his back turned, Carlos was unable to see what he was doing. A knock came from his door, and Roger went to answer it. On the table, Carlos saw clear baggies of a white crystalline rock, likely speed, divided up for sale. Along with it, a lockbox with other loose rocks was open. Seeing the potential drugs and his setup for sales and distribution, Carlos had what he needed and made his way back down the steps. Carlos' heart raced with a mixture of trepidation and anticipation. Almost every time he had Roger on the ropes, something always went wrong. This time, he had all his ducks in a row and would get it right. At the base of the fire escape, he took a moment to calm his breathing down, having not noticed that he was breathing rapidly increased in all the excitement. Dead ends always came up regarding the Fair Park slasher case, but it didn't stop him from tracking down every lead, no matter how insignificant. With his mind clear and his breathing under control, he was ready. Around the corner, he entered the building, careful to avoid making any unnecessary noise, and made his way up the stairwell to Roger's floor. Inside the stairwell, a foul whiff of bleach and dirty mop hit Carlos' nose, causing him to almost lose his balance as he tiptoed his way up and using his long-sleeved shirt to handle the rails, hoping to reduce his noise level further. Before Carlos opened the hallway door, it opened toward him. A tweaker in a hoodie popped out and froze, glancing down at Carlos' gun, and bolted past him down the stairs. Carlos ignored him and entered the hallway. Inside, every fourth light worked and flickered as if the power might go out at any moment. The numbers were hardly visible, but Carlos knew Roger's was the third on the left since it faced the street side. When he arrived at the apartment, he placed his ear to the door just out of the peephole view and heard some shuffling. He then heard what sounded like a butane torch cracking on a few times. Thump. 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 Valley City PD, Detective Alvarado. Open up, Carlos said. There was silence and then a loud crash. Open the door now, yelled Carlos. Still no response. Carlos took a step back and kicked the door in. The frame came apart, and the door flew open with wood particles scenting the air with sawdust-like pieces. Inside, he found the poker table on the ground, along with the bags of clear, smoky, chunky crystals, what Carlos deduced must be speed. The room was quiet but gave off a distinct odor of burning plastic, but it seemed to fade when Carlos recognized the smoke residue from smoking speed. Carlos pointed his gun in the room and slowly made his way in, tapping the bathroom door open but found no one. The bathroom lights flickered, and the toilet bowl tank slowly dripped as it filled. Bang. Carlos turned just in time to see the window shut, and Roger fleeing down the fire escape. Police! Stop. Carlos continued down the steps anyway, and fired a shot past Roger through the window as a warning. The raw, acrid odor of gunpowder wafted up Carlos' nose, burning his nostrils. The window in the foreground shattered, and the debris just missed Roger, who didn't even pause. Carlos then opened the other window and pursued him down the steps. Once outside and downstairs, Carlos made his way around the building and down the street where he had parked, firing another shot in the air, hoping to scare Roger, who stopped in his tracks next to a dumpster where he put his hands up. Carlos made his approach slowly and stopped a couple of feet short. He had to get his breathing under control to avoid hyperventilating, so he took 3 long breaths before speaking. Turn around. I have 2 questions for you. Roger turned around and wore a smile the size of a Cheshire cat. I'm not going to answer any, said Roger, interrupted by Carlos' gun at his temple. You were saying shitface, Carlos said, as he redirected his aim toward Roger's crotch. Like I was saying, I have 2 questions. Number 1. Who's your supplier? And number 2. What do you know about the Fair Park slasher? Answer me. Fuck you talking about? I ain't giving my source up. You're stupid, and I never heard of no Fair Park slasher. Roger even made his smile bigger. Carlos' heart raced and his chest tightened. His anger rose from the depths of his stomach. The only thing he hated more than drug dealers were liars. Fair Park slasher. What do you know? Tell me, fucker. Carlos' face beaded sweat and his eyes twitched. He applied pressure with the gun even further. I know nothing about the Fair Park slasher. I don't even know what that is. And you know I can't give up my source. It's not happening. Roger winked at Carlos. Before Carlos spoke, a 2x4 board whacked him across the head and dropped him to his knees. Someone was hiding behind the dumpster and caught him off guard. His hands weakened as he tried to point the gun back at Roger. The hidden assailant easily kicked it out of his hands. There was that smile again, before everything went black with the force of another whack on his head. He regained consciousness minutes later. Detective, you all right? Asked Sergeant Moody. One neighbor heard the gunshots and called 911. We found you here next to the dumpster, bleeding from your head. I was on a stakeout, waiting for the perp to get home. I pursued him out of his apartment when I got hit from behind. That's all I remember. Did you find anything in the apartment upstairs? Did you find the drugs? Detective, we did a thorough sweep of the apartment and found nothing strange. There was some furniture turned over, but that's about all. By the way, Captain Rankin wants to see when you're done here. Tell the captain I'm not feeling well. My head is killing me. Will you? Carlos asked. He wants to know what you were doing here, and why you busted into his apartment without calling for backup. But maybe you should go to the ER first. Look, I'm not feeling so hot. You tell him I'll drop by the hospital, but I'm going home right after, okay? Carlos then made his way toward his Explorer. Detective, I'm sorry, but the captain gave me strict orders that if you weren't feeling good that someone should drive you to the hospital. Let Officer Thomas here take you, and we'll drop off your truck at the hospital for you, okay? Fine, but I don't have to like it. Don't mess up my truck, Moody. Yes, sir, said Moody, shaking his head. Inside Thomas's patrol vehicle, he grabbed a cigarette from his pocket and glanced at his sister's photo that he had tucked away in wallet one more time. He made a promise to himself that he would find out what happened to her. Tomorrow, he would begin again. The flashing lights faded into the darkness in the rearview mirror as they sped toward Valley Baptist Medical Center for a quick checkup, then hopefully home to sleep it off. The next morning, Carlos sat at his desk in the corner near the window and finished typing his report on the Martinez case from last night. Outside, he glanced across the street onto the open field that is sometimes used as a soccer field, but today was empty, much like how Carlos felt. As he looked across the room, he had the best vantage point. Rotating detectives and other officers used the room from time to time, which had several rows of desks. The rows were bisected in the middle, creating a makeshift pathway that led to the captain's office, which stood at the top of a reverse sunken floor plan, which meant everyone in the office would have to look up to him. It was a strange design that Carlos never much liked. His office also had all glass surrounding windows, each with privacy blinds. There was no mistake. When he made detective almost 8 years ago, he made sure that his captain placed him in the corner. He wanted to see everyone at the same time. He didn't want any surprises. From his seat, he could see Captain Rankin's office. He tried not to look toward him, because he had yet to finish his report on what happened last night. The captain was on the phone with someone. His office door and blinds were open, thus giving everyone a glimpse into his office. His hands were stomping on his desk, causing the pictures of his kids to flop back and forth. He was screaming now, and his muffled conversation was full-on theater for everyone in the detective section to hear. As the conversation grew quieter, the captain seemed to gravitate towards his Iron Man stress ball that had seen better days. The captain unexpectedly jumped up, but his knees collided with his desk, creating a loud crash that couldn't go unnoticed. He dropped the phone and headed for his office door, stepping down 2 steps in obvious pain and annoyance, yelling, "Alvarado!" Rankin made a circling hand gesture rapidly. "Captain?" Carlos stood up and looked at Rankin, but did not move. "Stop staring at me and get your ass over here." Rankin snapped his fingers. Carlos moved past Detective Johnson's desk, who was off duty, and Detective Salinas' desk. Salinas was quietly reading something on his computer and taking notes. Carlos entered Rankin's office. "Sit," ordered Rankin. Carlos casually sat in the chair and slumped, sinking down into its plush cushions. He glanced around the small office, every spare space on the wall covered with some medal or award or diploma. Rankin had crumpled up packs of Pall Malls in his trash, even though smoking wasn't allowed in the building. The air smelled of osium and coffee. "Nice lazy boy, Captain. Stop pretending that nothing shitty happened last night, like you didn't go on a stakeout without backup, not informing anyone, and not to mention discharging your weapon multiple times and, oh, my favorite, getting knocked unconscious by a drug dealer. Is that it? Did I miss anything?" Captain always had a tendency to overreact to everything, and Carlos had learned to give him a wide berth for his unique way of leadership. What Carlos never got over was how awful the combination of spent cigarettes and burnt breath made more close-quarters conversation, and Rankin was one to always lean in and close talk to you. In fact, sometimes he would be so close that Carlos could pick out the gray hairs in his facial hair and receding hairline. It was not something he enjoyed doing, but a grin and bear moment that would soon pass as long as Carlos smiled and nodded. Because of his position, Rankin wore a suit more times than not, and today was no exception. His dark gray suit made his pale face even paler and almost Casper-like. The thin eyebrows didn't help either. "Don't overstate things, Captain. Martinez has been on my radar for a while now, and last night as I was heading home, one of my confidential informants tipped me he would be home, so I went and waited. The shitty thing that happened, Captain, was that somehow one of his accomplices, that I had no clue was there, cleaned up the place, leaving no fucking evidence other than my word." "Exactly. Your word. I have got to ask, how many drug dealers have you busted in the last 6 months alone?" "I don't know. 2 or 3. Why? Why are you wasting your time with such low-level bullshit? You're better than that, Alvarado. Those fuckers deserve to be off the street." "That may be so, but I have something else for you. I got a fresh case. Do you remember Coach Morelo from our softball league?" Rankin stood up from his chair and closed the blinds in his office, including the ones on his door, and tenderly shut it. Of course. When his neighbor found him, he was dead in his house, slumped over his kitchen table. His coffee and toast were still in front of him when his neighbor found him. Back at his desk, Rankin scrolled his mouse down a couple of pages on his computer. Mrs. Fuentes is her name. Apparently, Coach Morelo would sometimes help her with her yard work, and had come over to ask if he was free. She knocked several times and got no response. Making her way to the backyard, she went through the side gate and knocked on the back patio door. She found it open, let herself in, and found Coach Morelo at his kitchen table unresponsive. She called 911. "That's all we have for now. There's a unit on the scene, and they are expecting you." Rankin shook his head twice. "Find out what happened. Start with the neighbor and keep me updated." "Got it." And please get your shit together. This is important. They are all important, Captain. Carlos left the office and grabbed his things from his desk before heading toward his next assignment. The name Morelo kept bouncing around his head. It wasn't an uncommon name, but not one he ran into that often. The last Morelo he knew was his ex-boyfriend from high school. Carlos didn't enjoy leaving a case unfinished, but Rankin needed him to focus on the Morelo case instead. He would have to check up on Martinez when he had the time. Chapter 2. He was back on the west side of town, this time at the corner of Basin and Wichita near the Boys and Girls Club. He got up late and didn't have time to make his double espresso in the morning, so instead he stopped at Starbucks for an ice-shaken espresso with 3 shots did the trick. Carlos, who dressed less formally than most detectives, wore what he wore on any given day: a pair of dark wash athletic fit jeans, a solid color t-shirt, and some sort of light jacket to conceal his weapon. The darkness of his clothes did little to offset the brownness of his skin. From what his father told him, there was some Native American blood in him, the Karankawa tribe, if he remembered correctly. Carlos figured that's where he inherited his dark-skinned tone and minor tracking skills from. His hair was usually short and cut close with a clipper. Most times it grew fast, which kept going to sport clips monthly to keep his dark wavy hair in check. The sun in his eyes caused him to squint, making his brown eyes turn a shade of hazel as he surveyed the area of Fair Park. Unless there was a connected case, he had little reason to visit the west side. Mostly, it was a quiet part of town, and the only action this area got was the yearly Rio Fest, when corn in the cups and Tejano music reigned supreme for a week. As he drove down the long stretch of Wichita Street and approached Basin Street, it looked familiar. As he approached the house where Sergeant Moody waited, the house on the corner caught his eye. It was a bright yellow house with its porch cracked in half. The weeds had grown to the height of the now broken fence. Carlos had been here before. The cobwebs were clearing. He recognized the area, and it was all coming into place for him. Arriving at the scene, Carlos exited his black Ford Explorer. Outside, he found it a lot quieter than he had expected. In fact, there was no one outside other than Sergeant Moody and Mrs. Fuentes. Morelo neatly cut his lawn, and he adorned the sidewalk that led to the front door with 2 huge pine bushes. The house had a pale blue paint job. A chain-link fence that was about shoulder height surrounded the front yard. Carlos approached Sergeant Moody and retrieved his black leather Valley City PD-issued pocket notebook and his favorite paper-made flare pen. "What we got?" Carlos scanned the house. Moody's eyes seemed to narrow before speaking. "Detective, I arrived on the scene at approximately 1945 hours in response to a 911 call from Mrs. Fuentes here. She approached the front entrance and knocked several times, and when there was no response, she went around the side of the house to the back porch entrance." "Sergeant Moody, before you get too deep into it, I'm going to go look inside and see what I can find. Will you finish taking Ms. Fuentes' statement?" Carlos couldn't help and look at Sergeant Moody and find the guy strange. Not that he was abnormally tall, standing at 6'3", nor that he was already balding at only his mid-30s, but what struck Carlos strange was the unkemptness and size of his beard and facial hair. It seemed to grow in every which direction, and just seemed unprofessional. The rest of his uniform was tidy and in tip-top shape, so it made no sense to Carlos why Moody couldn't keep his personal grooming in check. The darkness of his facial hair against the whiteness of his skin made it all stand out the more. Carlos made mention to Rankin several times, but nothing came of it. It was more annoying than anything else. "Of course, Detective." Carlos advanced on the quiet home and made a mental note to get the rest of Ms. Fuentes' statement from Moody after he finished checking out the house. Moody always had a way to summarize statements in an efficient manner, plus Carlos's speed reading had come a long way since the academy. Most of the lights were off. He placed his notepad and pen in his pocket and retrieved some black nitrile gloves, which he quickly put on. He approached the home toward the side gate, which was already open. There was a side window, but the drapes prevented anyone from seeing anything inside. As he entered the backyard, he retrieved his flashlight, as the bright golden sun had set, and cast a slow-moving shadow that danced across the emerald lawn. Carlos flicked the lights on to get a better view, and entered the back dining room where he found Mr. Morelo. A strange smell hit Carlos straight in the face. It seemed to be a mixture of incense and Old Spice aftershave. The EMS who tried to revive Mr. Morelo, whose food was still on the table, left the kitchen table mostly untouched. A bowl of oatmeal and coffee was next to a copy of the Valley Morning Star, open to the sports section. The adjacent room had once been a bedroom, but it transformed into an office. Inside was a small twin bed and 2 desks in an L shape, cornering the far side of the room. Carlos turned on the lights and found stacks and stacks of old newspapers, then checked the windows for signs of intrusion, but they remained locked and untouched. He moved on to the kitchen. The kitchen was in a U-shaped setup. The coffee maker was on. There wasn't much else left on the counters. It seemed like no one had updated the kitchen in decades. Various shades of brown and beige dominated the cabinets and flooring. The linoleum checkered floor squeaked as Carlos' boots crossed the length of it. He peered inside every cabinet, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The refrigerator was old and bare, though inside the freezer was 1 bottle of Maker's Mark whiskey unopened. Carlos went to the living room and found the keys to the truck outside, hanging from a hook near the front entrance. The worn-out Chevy outside also seemed undisturbed, and carried what looked like a layer of thick dust and fallen dried leaves from the many trees from the nearby canals for some time. Carlos noticed that the living room was suspiciously empty of family photos or of anything that would make this house a home. There seemed to be 2 more rooms at the rear of the house. Inside the first room, he found a large king-sized bed along with a dresser and a vanity mirror. No TV. Black light-blocking blinds covered both windows. Clothes and boxes that smelled of mothballs and looked hardly touched filled the closet to the brim. Nothing out of place in the dresser drawers. There was a small business card at the edge of the mirror with the name Treasure Hills Graphics, Ruben Delgado, and some contact information. He took a quick picture of it with his phone and moved on to not disturb the scene further. Carlos bent down to see the base of the bed, which seemed to have a solid wooden base that was wrapped around the entire bed. He started from one end of the bed to the other and tapped his knuckle on it to see what sounds came from it. It all sounded the same. A deep, grounded sound emanated each time. He kept tapping till he came to the end of the frame, where the sound changed to a higher-pitched sound. He moved the bedding off the side and pushed off the mattress and box spring to the floor. Carlos could now get a better glimpse of the base, and found that part of the edge had chipped away from where it was grabbed. He reached into his pocket and grabbed his knife. He wedged it into the crack and popped open the wooden panel. Inside was a black metal cash drawer that gleamed with the light from his flashlight. He retrieved it, placed it on the bed, and found stacks of $100 bills mixed with other smaller bills. Under all the bills was an old-school vinyl-bound ledger accounting book for the money in the box. It was larger than the cash box and seemed to be written in some sort of code. The only thing that made any sense were the dollar amounts. The book contained handwritten entries, and the pages disappeared almost with their delicate, almost see-through beige paper. Carlos stopped for a moment and flipped the lights to the room on. He took photos with his phone of everything, including and especially the ledger. After he finished, he put it back under the bed and left the panel open for it to be marked into evidence. Using the strongest setting of his light, he continued to search for other clues. The hairs on his hands and arms inched their way up. His neck tingled. Something was off. The next room was all but empty, except for another small twin bed and a dresser with all the pictures that had been missing from the living room. Pictures of Mr. Morelo, and presumably his wife and his kids. One picture stood out to Carlos, and he picked it up. It was a picture of a young man in his high school graduating cap and gown. The picture had a label that read, Class of 2009, Valley High School, Henry Morelo. Carlos paused for a moment and popped his knuckles one by one. He continued to stare at the picture and wondered how he didn't notice the name Morelo before and made the connection, but now he knew for sure. The street name, the yellow house on the corner, it all came back to him. Henry became a distant part of Carlos's memory until his graduation picture brought it all to the forefront. Flashes of Henry ran through his mind, and a deep pang entered his stomach. His insides twisted and turned and made him feel nauseous. He regretted having those iced espressos earlier without food. He placed the picture back down on the dresser and edged it back in place, but when he did, another smaller piece of cardstock fell on the dresser. One side had a picture of a knife dripping blood in red and white shading, and the other had 2 lines of text. Looks like you were too late again, Detective Alvarado. Wanna play? Without thinking, Carlos dropped his flashlight and stumbled back, tripping on the nightstand, causing him to fall back onto the twin bed. He stared at the words. Was it true? The beads of sweat trickled down his brow and into his lips. The bitter taste jolted him back to reality. Was this a coincidence? Years of unfulfilled hatred rushed back. He closed his eyes and slowed his breathing. He wasted no time. If he was to solve Mr. Morelo's death and find a link to the Fair Park slasher, he needed to get going. But what about Henry? Chapter 3. Upon answering the call, Henry felt surprised to hear Detective Salinas on the other end and not someone from the funeral home. He was sitting in his dorm room doing some homework. The voice that answered caught him off guard, as it grumbled more than sounded normal. Henry's total disposition changed and almost knocked him back from his chair onto the back of his loft bed. Henry wore a backward UNT cap and whatever clean shirt he could find, nothing to say for shorts. Living in North Texas, his Mexican heritage was easy to spot and sometimes brought him trouble in school of primarily white individuals. His skin color was lighter than most and often would go unnoticed, but whenever he spoke, his accent he swore he couldn't hear was a dead giveaway. Detective Salinas' gruff voice and thick accent was even thicker than his. Mr. Morelo, this is Detective Salinas from the Valley City Police Department. I'm calling about your father. Is there something wrong? There is no easy way to say this, but your father died 2 nights ago. Henry stayed silent for a moment. He didn't speak to his father in almost 10 years, and his death caught him off guard. Henry didn't know how to react. He tried to push some feelings out, but nothing came. He wasn't sure what it meant. Wait, why are you calling me and not the funeral home? Did something else happen? There was a long pause on the detective's part. Your father's system contained small amounts of brodifacoum, also known as rat poison. The preliminary autopsy showed he was ingesting it for quite some time, likely for the last few weeks. We will tell more with further tests. He paid a visit to his primary care physician last week and reported experiencing bloody urine and diarrhea, which is a symptom of brodifacoum poisoning. Although there was no way to know that he was ingesting it for weeks, the doctor diagnosed it as a urinary tract infection and gave him some antibiotics to manage it. His numbness turned to confusion and anger. Somebody poisoned my father, said Henry as his voice cracked. We don't want to jump to conclusions. Unfortunately, we don't have much else to tell you now. We are doing a full investigation and for now, considering this a homicide investigation. Until we have more information, we can't rule anything out. I promise, Mr. Morelo, we will find out what happened. Your father was a friend to the department. Walking over to the window after closing his laptop, Henry looked out to Rogers Quadrangle, where people were playing frisbee golf, sitting on his bed, continuing to peer out. Really? You knew my father? How? He coached our softball charity team every summer and made his beans every year for the Valley City Police Night Out event. The money he made on selling his beans, he'd donate back to us. Like I said, he was a friend of the department. So believe me when I tell you, we will find out what happened. We have assigned Detective Alvarado to his case. He will reach out to you soon, but feel free to reach him here anytime. Our department has a great relationship with the New Today counseling services. If you are interested, I can have Detective Alvarado provide you with their number as well. Again, I am sorry for your loss. Just like that, his father's death turned into a murder, but who in the world would want to harm his father? Henry thought. He wondered how he was ingesting poison for so long without even knowing it. He needed to contact Detective Alvarado and discover what took place. Every Sunday morning for breakfast, it would be the same thing: fried eggs with refried beans and a tortilla. Of course, his mother had made the beans earlier in the morning, and she freshly smashed them with lard, which gave the beans a shimmer. Henry remembered eating the beans but never had watched his father make them, so they would almost be impossible to recreate. Henry's grumbling stomach brought him back to reality, realizing he hadn't eaten since he got the news of his father's death. Henry Morelo stood in his father's kitchen, staring at a pot of water, not knowing where to begin. He had all the ingredients needed, at least he thought he did, laid out on the kitchen counter. Every time he tried in the past to cook his father's frijoles charro, they always came out hard and bland. Henry tried to remember the times he spent with his father watching him cook, but all he could remember was the aroma of beans boiling, bacon, and a dark, almost smoky cumin scent wafting throughout the house. In fact, that smell would be his alarm clock on Sunday mornings. Making the trip down from North Texas in just under 10 hours and arriving at an empty home made Henry feel uneasy. His mom died several years earlier of cancer, and his father lived alone in his childhood home. It was a strange thing to arrive home and find it empty. Henry's father died so suddenly that all his things were still lying around, including his shoes which were still at the door, his coffee cup still filled with now cold decaf coffee, and the keys to his white Chevy still hung by the door. Henry opened the refrigerator door and found it quite empty, except for a Tupperware container filled to the brim. Opening it, to his surprise, he found his father's beans. His father must have made them a few days before. The simple fact he held the last thing his father had ever made caused Henry to tear up. Looking over to the kitchen table, Henry could imagine his father sitting there on Sunday mornings, drinking his coffee, eating some hot beans, and reading the newspaper. It was all too much, so he warmed up some beans and made himself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table in the same spot where his father used to, imagining how his father must have felt sitting there alone every day. Both Henry's siblings lived out of state and never came to visit, and Henry hadn't talked to his father in over 10 years. Coming home to his empty house, he regrets that now. A round dish, holding change, and tiny folded pieces of stapled paper were in the middle of the kitchen table. There were dozens of folded papers, and a black flip notebook with lines after lines of scribbled numbers and dates. Henry opened one of the folder papers and read 2412. Every single paper had something similar. Just under the bowl sat last Sunday's sports section of the Valley Morning Star, the local newspaper. On the list of the week's games, he found several of them circled along with the dates. Henry matched those with the listings in the notebook. It all made sense. His father would always be on the phone on Friday nights, especially when a football game was on. Somebody named Ricky or Jose would come knocking on the door, wanting to buy a ticket for the game. Henry's father would run bets on who would win the game and by how much. By selling a certain number of tickets every week, he had a system in place that guaranteed him at least a couple hundred in profits. It puzzled Henry because someone would use rat poison to kill a man over a few $100s, especially considering he had a betting pool in place. Something didn't add up to Henry. But what could it be?